Thank you, Sherren. Over to you for the next session, and I will come back to the other champions after your session.
Well, thanks very much, Latika. And we have three fabulous women here who also happen to be champions and part of this wonderful initiative that Vani and everybody else has put together. Priyanka Gill, the co-founder now of MyGlamm. Priyanka, thanks very much for joining us. Annual female users, 88 million, acquiring 200,000 new users every month. We've talked a lot about capital. Closed the Series C funding round with a corpus of 530 crores and more, I believe, is likely on the cards. So Priyanka, thanks very much for joining us here today. Also with us is somebody that I've had the opportunity to speak with several times in the past, Ankiti Bose. Ankiti, thanks very much. Gives me a complex because she's all of 29 and has been able to achieve so much more than I did at that age. She's running something which basically helps deal with the supply chain of the fashion industry, and again has been able to get over 50,000 merchants on board, over 2 million product listings, and of course has the who's who in terms of funders, raised a round by CXXO Capital, Temasek, and many others. Last known valuation, I was told, was 970 million. So Sunicorn is how we can describe Ankiti's Zilingo. And our next champion this evening is Prerna Jhunjhunwala, the founder of Creative Galileo. This is also a company that has now forayed into the education space and has a history of being in the education space for the last few years. It's an edtech startup founded by her. So again, she's currently bootstrapped, but is in talks with venture capital firms in India as well as the ASEAN region to close a funding round. So Prerna, Priyanka, and Ankiti, thanks very much for joining us. Priyanka, let me start by asking you. And, one of the things that we were addressing, and I know that, as I pointed out, that many of us here on this panel don't necessarily carry the cultural baggage that many women have to face. And so I don't want to go down that road with you. But let's address the issue of capital. When you were going out there to raise funds, was it a constraint being a woman? Did the gender lens become a factor? Was the bar different for you? If yes, how so?
Hi, Sherren, and it's always great talking to you. And again, it's my privilege to be here. And Vani, again, one more time, thank you. I think I'm going to spend the whole day and more saying thank you for this. I also wish, like Shraddha, that this was there when I first started. And so it's here today. And I'm so glad that CXXO is finally live. So, Sherren, I have one story to tell. I was in a room of 50 men. It was my post angel round, and this gentleman stands up and says, hey, you come from a rich family, your husband's a rich man, why isn't he giving you money? Why are you asking us for money? And being kind of, again, a newbie founder in 50 other men, kind of listening to you and watching you react to this, that was my first experience of this gender lens that is there for female founders out there. And then I had to stand up for myself and kind of answer the question in a way that was suitable to the room. So I did that. It is hard to raise capital. It's harder to raise capital as a female. That is a fact, and there is no doubt about that. I believe a man will raise more capital with less effort. And we really have to jump through hoops to kind of raise less capital than kind of our male counterparts. And that really kind of is a barrier to you starting out of the gate, because you raise less capital and then you have less capital to play with. And then you're raising more capital more quicker than maybe a man would. And then they come back and say that, oh, you didn't do as much. So we won't give you money again, right? So it kind of becomes a vicious circle that you put into right from the start. And Ankiti speaks about this a lot, right? Women just get funded less. Even if they get funded less. And that's a huge problem that we have.
And this is something, Ankiti, let me take that across to you, because I've heard this so often, and I've heard men say it, but I've also heard women say it, that, look, it's all about the strength of an idea. If you have a good idea, you'll get the requisite funding. Is that plain bull? Is that plain BS?
I think so. I think it's plain BS, because it's not just the idea. It's the community network that brings you capital, that brings you customers, that brings you access. A lot of these discussions are, quote unquote boys club discussions that happen over beer, and we're not even in the room. So I think that coaching and capital and community have to go together for that reason, and that's why what Vani is doing.
So
And
is this the boys club equivalent? Is that the hope? Yeah.
Well, at least I hope that it undoes the uneven playing field, because like Priyanka said, it's definitely true that these decisions and customers and clients and capital is these decisions are being made in rooms that we are not a part of today. But if there's enough of us, then it becomes an inevitable thing that we will, the rooms where the decisions are made, if they look diverse, if there are more.
And you think you're not part of the rooms primarily because of your gender?
I think, Sherren, I always say this, and I think Priyanka also put this across well. We may have been privileged and worked very hard, perhaps harder than the men around us to get here. But because we are also the one woman in the room, perhaps it's harder than it would be if that room where these decisions are made and where well-funded companies are sitting, if it had more female CEOs. And I think it goes to a broader point of we need more female VCs and female LPs and GPs, which sort of then truly balances it out. But really putting capital at work is I think key. Otherwise, it just the intentions are great, and several initiatives have great intention, but this one really I think the money is being put it's like walking the talk. So
passionate point. We lost her feed, but I know exactly what you're saying, Ankiti, and I think many of us, or most of us, have faced this situation of walking into a room of suits and being the only women where there's about 50 men that you're up against. I know that feeling only too well. But Prerna, let me get you into the conversation. And it's not just about the lack of community or the lack of mentorship or the lack of access to capital and the lack of access to the kind of networking that Ankiti and Priyanka were talking about. It's also a cultural issue. The culture does play an important role in constraining and limiting the choices that women make. Do you believe that that's also a significant part of holding, not just women holding themselves back, but the entire ecosystem, the stakeholders, the patriarchy gets in the way of realizing true potential?
I actually fully agree with Ankiti and Priyanka, right? These challenges for funding, these challenges for community, they all exist because we are a part of such an ecosystem. When men are ambitious, they are rewarded for that ambition. But when women are ambitious, we are asked to apologize for that ambition. It is a systematic barrier in the mindset that if you don't get married, you're abnormal. If you get married and then you don't want to have children, you're selfish. If you have children and work crazy hours, you're a bad mother. On top of that, you have to be a good wife, a good daughter, a good daughter-in-law. So as a woman, you have to rise up from all these different situations, and you have to be relentless. And I say this with complete conviction that we have to be so relentless in the pursuit of success. We have to be unabashedly focused on our goal, because when a woman achieves, she is carrying the weight of being a change maker for generations to come. She gives voice to multiple women who today don't have those voices. And to me, that inspiration, and I really look up to that moment, is when Whitney Wolf rang the NASDAQ bell. And she, at the age of 31, was carrying a baby, a 3-week baby, and rang that bell. And this inspired so many women. So we need more such examples, more such mentors, more such leaders who shattered that glass ceiling.
That's an important point that you make there. And Priyanka, I want to take that across to you. To the point that Prerna was making about the fact that you're almost penalized for having ambition. You're almost penalized for wanting to dream big. And you limit yourself into little boxes because you don't want to displease. And let's be clear, women, because culturally we've been taught to be people pleasers, you force yourself into these templates. But the Whitney Wolf example, does that also also then raise the bar for women? You again, it's always this sort of, high achieving, high performance, can do everything at the same time all the time. Does that also put enormous pressure on women?
I genuinely believe that that is the case, right? For a man to be successful, he's not required to hold his baby while ringing any bell, right? And but for women, it kind of, I mean, it's symbolic. It's great. I'm a huge fan of what she's built. I'm a huge fan of Whitney herself. As a mother, I really empathize with that kind of that image is a very, very powerful image, right? But I worry that it just puts this enormous burden on us as female entrepreneurs, that is what success is, right? I'm entirely okay with the woman just ringing the bell with baby, without baby, doesn't really matter. Work-life balance, all of us get asked this question a gazillion times. How do you manage? Is it a myth? And all of that. It's priorities, right? And it's the effort that we put behind whatever that we are doing. I'm very, very ambitious. I don't apologize for that. I don't expect to explain that to anyone. And that's just the way that I am, right? And having that drive is something that's coming from within me. I'm not doing it to prove a point. So once you actually manage to level out all of those thoughts in your head, and you know exactly why you're doing something, a lot of the confusion flows away. And that is in our control to do, right? That's not something that someone's going to give us. That's something that's within our control. So while I love the image of Anjali Sood, and while I love the image of Whitney Wolf kind of ringing the bell with kids in tow, I just feel that we have just to do a great job. We have to create great value. If you're comfortable, please take your babies to ring whatever the bell when you kind of you IPO. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't have to do that. And as women, we don't need to take that upon ourselves, that our level of success has to be that high for it to be meaningful, right? It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Ankiti, I want to address another issue, and that also has to do with something that we spoke of earlier. And that is whether the approach of how you deal with, when you're making hiring decisions, when you're running the organization at an operational level, it differs for a woman versus a man. Do you get treated differently by people who work with you who happen to be men? Is that also a challenge that you face?
Yeah, I think, Sherren, both age and gender play into this. Gender definitely plays a big role, wherein you have to, as a woman, always prove yourself, perhaps do 110% or 120% to be taken as seriously as a man would if he was at 90 or 95. Which means that, we have to be undeniably good, and even then be ready for a little bit more criticism than a man. I have definitely faced that, in my business, I work with traders, very old school guys along the supply chain. It happens all the time. And I think the only way, I tell myself, don't get frustrated, because it'll take 10, 20, 30 years to change it. The only way it'll change is when there is more diversity in the mix in the leadership positions on all sides. So yes, definitely.
Prerna, has that been a factor for you?
Yes, I mean, I agree with that completely. And I also think that there has been a very, there has been a very sudden change, right? Like if we look at our own history as Indians, there were great women, examples, call it Rani Lakshmi Bai, call it many, many such women, which are examples of power. But in the last 50 years, what has happened is that women are somehow made to believe that they don't belong in those boardrooms. They don't belong in even classrooms, right? Education is becoming more and is always been a challenge for women literacy. We are not the decisions makers, and all these big decisions are supposed to be left with the men. So when we have to walk into that room, which is dominated by rather capable men and rather capable people, we have to be so we have to have that perseverance that we are there because we deserve it. We worked hard for this, and we have to stand there in all our power, not doubting ourselves and putting our best foot forward, right? And that is the way I feel that as women, we can progress into a new age altogether.
Priyanka, I want to address the issue that we just heard there from Prerna as well, and I know that Vani spoke about this in her introductory comments as well. And I faced this several times over, for instance, a few years ago when we were doing our India Business Leader Awards. I said, should we put an all women's jury together? Because over the last 15 years of doing those awards, we would, I would make it a point to try and at least have 1 or 2 women on the jury. But I said, is it time for us to actually do an all women's jury? And we actually did do that. But then, the question in your head is that, is this really the right approach, or should it just happen organically? But I would imagine that it's not happening organically, which is why we feel the need to do CXXO, or which is why there is now a mandate by the market regulator to have women directors on company boards, because it was not happening organically. So do you believe that we need, regulation to improve representation of women?
I think intervention is needed, right? If you look at the history of rights in history, intervention was required for kind of change to come forward quickly, right? We couldn't leave it to market forces. We couldn't leave it to socio-political forces to actually allow that change to evolve over time. Too much damage gets done when you wait for change to happen. So I 100% believe that intervention is needed. I think something like CXXO, which is an initiative powered by women for women to solve a very, very female problem that we have today of equity. It's absolute regulation. I wouldn't go that far. So again, I am not an expert in that. I wouldn't kind of want to go there, but definitely intervention is required, and it needs to be done with enough sensitivity and with kind of the right levers need to be pushed for change to actually happen, right? Vani is putting capital behind it, right? This is not just kind of, this is not just a conference for the sake of being a conference, or we're not just talking about it. We're actually putting forward a game plan. We are backing it with money. And we have metrics. All of us run companies. We understand the importance of that. So this is a very, very serious thing that we're talking about. And without it, I don't see how change would actually kind of happen on its own.
Yeah.
Because no man is going to give this to you, right? I mean, they're very, very comfortable in their kind of bastions of power. And they don't want to change the status quo. So something else has to come in and force that change, because it makes economic sense. Women are half the market, we are half the audience, we are half the buyers, we are half the money, but products are not made for us, right? So you need women to come in, step in, and redress this very, very obvious problem of inequity that we have.
Absolutely, the many gaps that we face. But Ankiti, one of the other things that I want to address with you, and I've seen this over the last 20 years that I've been speaking to women from the likes of Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw to young entrepreneurs. There's also, a templatized or a predetermined notion of the kinds of businesses that women can run or should run or will be successful running. Do you believe that has changed somewhat, or do those templates still sort of exist and define how potential investors look at a woman entrepreneur?
It's so funny, Sherren. I had a female investor tell me that she met 2 founders who quote unquote mansplained to her how women like to shop now, like how young women like to shop. So I think where we're at is that men are allowed to have an opinion or build out anything and everything and to invest in it. For women, it's changing gradually. I think it definitely still there are some deep biases. I think in retail and commerce and fashion, it's probably a little bit easier than perhaps deep tech. Even when I think about my own journey, when people talk about the commerce aspect or the retail aspect or the fashion aspect, they yield to my judgment. But the minute it switches to financial services in our very own business or technology, I see them immediately switching to the man in the room. So I think long way to go, and these stereotypes and biases are very much around. And I'm really looking forward to the next deep tech female founder who hopefully, confounds every man around her.
Absolutely. We more power to you. Prerna, of course, today is a great beginning because, as Vani said, this group is putting its money where the mouth is and actually putting $10 million to use. But what else is it that you believe needs to change as part of this community?
So I think definitely funding is a big part of it, but a big part of it is also mentorship, because there are young founders, a lot of young founders, even people like me. We need the guidance and support to overcome a lot of internal and external challenges. And that is when we level the playing field. And increasingly what is happening is women are demanding a new society, a society that gives them opportunities. And for that, we don't need to depend on anyone else. We are building systems ourselves that are helping us support that growth. And
So who did you turn to? Let me ask you this, who did you turn to when you had a problem at work, or you were, caught between making a strategic decision and you were confused? Who did you turn to?
Funnily enough, I didn't have that support. So it's great that now we are being given that support. So I think for me, it was still traditional, right? I turned to my father, I turned to my husband, I turned to my father-in-law. So it was still those traditional means that you use to kind of get the right guidance. But a lot of time, the struggles that you're facing is not something that a man can help you in the business. It's just a lot of time as a woman that it's almost difficult to explain that when you're pitching to a person, you can feel that bias, and men don't necessarily relate to it in the moment. So funnily enough, I didn't have that support that time. So I'm glad that this community is coming together, because when we need to make that change, right? Change is not a magic. We all carry that power to collectively and individually make that change. So I'm really glad that we're doing it now.
I would have loved to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, I have a live show to do, but I do want to get a last question in. And Priyanka, let me put that to you. We've talked about some of the meaningful challenges that women continue to face, and this is all real stuff. But as part of the CXXO community that we're building, do you not believe that there should be men part of this as well?
Well, talk about ending with loaded questions, Sherren. No, actually, I think we are quite good at running things, and leave it to us.
Do we not run the risk then? Do we not run the risk of women speaking to other women? But we do need to engage much more with the men as well, right? To get them to see. Yeah.
No, I think we've had actually a lot of serious discussion on this, and this is not something that we haven't spoken about. But I think for now, the board is all female. And there's some amazing people on the board, right? And they have all the qualifications that